What's up, everybody? Core Use Bloody History. Here we go. We're going to continue on with this HSCA. Let me see. We should be able to get through this today. About 35 pages to go, so we should be able to get through this. We're going to wrap up this interview from 11/20/78 with Ann Goodpasture, who was Win Scott's quote-unquote right-hand man. Knew everything that was going on in that station pretty much, except for what she lies here and denies. But we should be able to wrap this up today. This subject matter has been on Oswald's alleged trip to Mexico City and the fact that Elena Guerrero de Paz, she allegedly said that Oswald was sleeping with Sylvia Duran and that she saw them at a party together in early September of 1963. And remember, Oswald never went to Mexico City. It was Kerry Thornley in Mexico City. And Kerry Thornley admits that he was in Mexico City not only in May of 63, but in late August, early September, on his way back to New Orleans from Whittier, California, right? So that has been the subject matter, and that's why Ann Goodpasture is relevant, because she was the one who picked out the photograph of Saul Sage that was sent up to the U.S. as Oswald, right? So as we talked about yesterday, there was some kind of confusion over that. I think historical confusion over that, and blown out of proportion propaganda-wise, meaning that when Ann Goodpasture was asked to go through those photographs and pick out a picture of Oswald, who allegedly went to the embassy on that day, she picked out a picture of a man who she said went to the Cuban embassy on that day and was the only one who looked like an American, right? And so that's why she handed it over to Win Scott, and Win Scott just sent it up to headquarters. And we don't know what message he attached to it, right? Did he tell headquarters that it was the only American-looking person who entered that day, or that it was not particularly Oswald, or what? We have no idea what he said to them when he sent that picture up. But the story makes a lot more sense when you hear it directly from Ann Goodpasture, why they sent that picture, okay? Did they know it was not Oswald? No, it was the only American who went to the fucking Cuban embassy that day that was requested. But that's the overall, that's what we've gotten out of these interviews so far. And just for the sake of completionism, when we get done with this, I might do another day on something else, but we're going to get back to Ann Goodpasture's interviews in 95 and 98 under the ARRB, which is the Assassination Records Review Board. So, but we're going to pick up in this interview from here where we left off. Remember, Mr. Goldsmith, who's a CIA shill, is doing the interviewing here. Do you know why Calvillo, who is L.I. Chant 1, discouraged Elena Guerrero de Paz from contacting the American embassy? No. Did you ever meet this man, Calvillo? No. You indicated earlier that I don't even know who he reported to in the station. And then they talk off the record. And then she says, no, it would have probably been either redacted or one of these people in the Cuban embassy, but you can find out by getting his 201 file and finding out whom he reported to and who wrote reports on him. Mr. Goldsmith resumes and says, okay. He would have a 201 file and he would have an agent file. I think to get the money to pay the man, they had to submit an operational report on their contacts with him. Did you ever submit any questions to Redacted to pass on to Mr. Thomas? I'm sure I did, but I don't remember what they were. I probably took the memo that Redacted had written and wrote up a list of questions that went something like, quote, who else was there when Sylvia Duran, when this occurred, where, at what time, and so forth, and how did she communicate with him? Did this man Calvillo, L.I. Chant 1, ever submit any written reports regarding Elena Guerrero de Paz? I don't know, but his file should indicate whether there were any. Is it possible that Calvillo was an unwitting asset to the agency? It is possible that Calvillo was a subagent of Redacted, and also at the time he was being handled by someone in the station without our knowledge. I mean, a subagent of Redacted without our knowledge. She's talking about the one of the guys in the Mexican equivalent of the FBI who was interacting with them at this time over this topic, that's whose name is Redacted. It's going to be one of the Mexicans' names. He may have been on surveillance team directed by one of the people that Redacted was handling. At the same time he was on that team, he may have been reporting to Bob Shaw or Mr. Redacted or Mr. Phillips. I see. Let me show you CIA number 725, and I would like to ask you to read entry number 466. Yes. Does this entry appear to confirm that Elena Guerrero de Paz did in fact stay at a small hotel in Mexico City several days immediately after the assassination? That's the notation made by Mr. Rocca, and this memo was from the FBI office to Mr. Scott. And the substance of the memo appears to confirm that aspect of her story. Is that correct? Unless there was another person by the same name from San Luis Potosi at the hotel, which I doubt. Well, in substance, the memo tends to confirm that aspect of the story. Is that correct? That would be my deduction, yes. Do you know whether Calvillo L.I. Chant 1 was questioned about this? No. Even after this portion of his story was confirmed, he was not questioned about it. Or you don't know if he was questioned about it. I don't know because I wouldn't have been the person that would have been, I should have seen part of it, but it would have been up to redacted probably to read the material when it came in. Do you know why it would have taken almost a year to have confirmed this aspect of Elena Guerrero de Paz's story? I might add that, well, you almost could never get an answer out of Charlie Thomas when you asked him something. He wrote these memos constantly. Then you would ask him for additional information. It would be just like dropping a rock into the ocean. It never came back up, but I don't know. So are you saying that because Mr. Thomas was slow in responding to inquiries by the station, that this is why it took so long to confirm this aspect of his story? Well, he reported information that he had heard, and then I think that he was not always able to go back to the source and say, you say such and such a time this, can you give me more information? He didn't want to be embarrassed by asking for additional information. He had no asset. Apparently, the sequence of events was approximately as follows. On December 10th, Mr. Thomas made his report about Elena Guerrero. He was asked to get more specific information, and between December 10th and approximately December 25th, this is 1965, he went back to Elena Guerrero and talked to her personally, accompanied her to the hotel where she claims she had stayed, and reported that information back to the station, and yet it wasn't until October of 66, almost a year later, that the FBI confirmed this aspect of her story. Do you know why it took that long for the U.S. government in Mexico City to confirm that? Unless Mr. Scott may have felt that it wasn't that important, but the answer to your question, I don't know. How seriously were Elena Guerrero de Paz's allegations taken in Mexico City? I don't think they were taken too seriously. Why not? Because she and her husband, her ex-husband, was flighty, and her general reputation was one that she dealt a lot in fantasy. Now, after one aspect of Elena Guerrero de Paz's story was confirmed, the fact that she had stayed at the hotel, did the agency at that point attempt to do any follow-up investigation to confirm other aspects of her story? I don't know. In other words, it seemed as though, although she may have been flighty, at least she appears to have been telling the truth about staying at the hotel immediately after the assassination. Well, I don't think the agency had any assets that could be used to confirm the allegations about Sylvia Duran having a sexual relationship with him. Well, what about Oswald having? We used to work on it. What about the central allegation, which was that Oswald had been at the party? Pardon me? What about the central allegation that Oswald had been at the party? Well, that was another case of where too much time had gone by. We just could not, we did not have any leads to work on, I think. This was just 2 years after the assassination, though. Was there a record kept of the agency's efforts to investigate this allegation? Pardon me? Was there a record kept of the agency's efforts to investigate this allegation? There would have been records kept of all the questions that had gone out. A copy of that should have been in the file, her Mexico station file. And also her 201 file, the 201 file. So that would be her Mexico City file, and her file, not at headquarters. Not all the raw materials would have been reported from Mexico to headquarters unless it had some results. But if we asked the Mexicans to help us identify her, a copy of it would have been included. Then you have a whole sentence redacted here. The history of Mexico City Station, which you prepared, contains a statement that Oswald made his contact with the embassies on September 26th and October 6th, 1963. In fact, October 6th? Yes, in fact, the record suggests that he was there and made his contacts from September 27th to October 1st. That's what it should have been. That was probably a typographical error. All right, hang on a second. So Oswald allegedly didn't leave Mexico City until October 2nd or 3rd. However, remember, his bus pass allegedly was stamped only with the date September 30th, with no timing that showed it was for a future date, right? So we have to assume that if there was even a bus taken at all, it was taken on September 30th. right? So any idea, any notion that Oswald had contacts on October the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th is complete nonsense. There was nobody there. There was no Oswald character there post September 30th, from what I can tell. That's what it should have been. That was probably a typographical error. Did you review that report after it had been prepared? Not completely, because I was in the process of being transferred from one section to another, and I was held up waiting for that report to be typed, and it hadn't been completely typed when I finally left, but it was my understanding that the draft of that report was to be retained. I went over the draft a number of times. Do you recall that Oswald made any contacts with these embassies on October 6th or September 26th? No, that would have been a mistake. I think the dates were the 27th and the 1st. That is more accurate, definitely. The 1st of October. And there would have been no material for me to use for research other than the same material that has been used here. It was the transcripts. Is it possible that Oswald called back on October 6th to find out whether he had obtained a visa? If he called back on that, we would have had it on the transcripts. Do you think, no matter what time of day or hour, I think because they were set up to activate when you call. Do you have any memory of that happening? No. Miss Goodpasture, I have no further questions of you today. You've been very helpful. Now the committee rules in the case of executive session hearings are such that a witness is given 5 minutes to make a statement for the record. This is not an executive session hearing today. This is a deposition, but if you would like to make a statement for the record for 5 minutes or less, you're free to do so at this time. The only thing I would like to say is thank you for your patience. Well, thank you very much. And I hope that there has been clarification, and if there is anything else I can do, I'll be willing to come back. Mr. Goldsmith says thank you, and whereupon at 2:37 o'clock, the deposition is ended. Blah, 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 blah. Then you have a bunch of stuff here. Certificate of reporter, stenographer statements, certificate of the notary public. And then we come upon a page. Okay, so here we have some attachments to her statements. And we have the hand-drawn map of the embassy, right, with the locations of the cameras set up in stations 1, 2, and 3 surrounding the embassy. And it looks like they actually got one of the cameras inside the walls of the embassy, which is pretty phenomenal. And here we have a handwritten statement on Soviet photo operations. And Goodpasture testified that Tom Keenan had complete supervision of the Soviet photo project. Tom Keenan, there's a word crossed off here, and above it, it says STATZC stack. I'm not sure what they're talking about there. That he only did the legwork, and that Ann Goodpasture supervised the project. There's a bunch of redacted names. Redacted testified that Ann Goodpasture reviewed all of the photos. He also testified that Ann Goodpasture felt that this was her area of responsibility, while Redacted and I had access to the photographs. It was mostly when Anne thought there was something important to show me that we saw the product, or when we felt that we had to review the product if a certain day, a certain hour to confirm or deny certain information. We had that. We asked to see and did see whenever we wanted the product for the particular period. Redacted looks like testified that whenever she wanted to see anything that had to do with the Soviet photo project, she always asked Anne first. She further testified that as far as she was concerned, so this is another female who testified, whose name is redacted at this point, who was obviously involved in the CIA station. As far as she was concerned, Ann Goodpasture I can't read this word. COTH. Controlled access. There we go. Controlled access to the photographs. When Redacted was asked if either Goodpasture or looks like Puckett was in charge of the photo surveillance operation, she answered, "I would say it was Goodpasture because I can't think of anyone else there who would have more responsibility than she." Something redacted. Mrs. Goodpasture should also be questioned about the manner that the CIA identified the individuals in the photos received from their surveillance of the Soviet embassy. So if you'll recall from the conversation that allegedly Oswald had with the person at the Soviet embassy from the Cuban embassy, right? He goes to the Cuban embassy and he phones the Soviet embassy. And they have a conversation. And the person who was allegedly Oswald says, "I was just in your agency. I was just at your embassy. I left the address of where I'm staying. But I just went to the Cuban embassy because they know where I'm staying." Right? It was all weird and cryptic, right? Like broken bad Russian. And then the person at the Soviet embassy says to allegedly Oswald, basically, "What the fuck do you want? What are you doing? Why are you calling me?" And then the person who's Oswald says, "Well, I was just there and I left my address, but now I'm here at the Cuban embassy and they already have my address." Right? And it doesn't make any sense what he's saying. And then the person at the Soviet embassy then says, why don't you come back here and leave your address with us? And so he says, "Okay, I'll be right there." Right? So you have this person who definitely went to the Cuban embassy, and there should be photographs of them at the Soviet embassy, right? But when Ann Goodpasture sends the photographs to Win Scott, and Win Scott then sends them up to headquarters there of Saul Sage, right? So they're saying here, question her about that. With regard to both the Soviet and Cuban photo surveillance project, Miss Goodpasture needs to clarify why there were no previous photos of Lee Harvey Oswald if he went to the embassies at least 5 times. Okay, so he went back and forth to these embassies at least 5 fucking times, and they don't have any photographic record of it. And asked if she ever saw or heard of a transcript where Lee Harvey Oswald asked for and was told he would be granted aid by the Soviet embassy officials. That's probably what I was just talking about. Redacted also told committee staff persons that James Angleton and Winston Scott were close personal friends. He asked that one agent of the relationship, which something I can't read him, was that when Winston Scott died, James Angleton went to his home and cleaned out Scott's safe. He stated that he knew this because he had been told by Janet Scott, and then something's redacted. Ms. Goodpasture must be asked about Win Scott's relationship with James Angleton. James Angleton's work in Mexico City in 1964 and his visit to Mexico Winston Scott died. When Winston Scott died, it must have been that. She must be also asked whether she knew that James Angleton had cleaned out Winston Scott's safe when he died, and what Scott could have kept in his safe that Angleton might have been deemed of such importance. All right, so Ergo and Jim, if you guys could pull anything about James Angleton in Mexico City in 1964 and all this stuff about Win Scott's safe. Thank you. Mrs. Goodpasture stated that she thought that there were 5 lines tagged in the Soviet embassy and 4 or 5 in the Cuban consulate embassy, and she stated that she did not remember which lines had been tapped, but that she had listed them all the previous year when she reviewed the transcripts. When asked by a staff counsel where the list was, and Goodpasture stated, quote, "It should be in your records. I was told that you had a copy of all the transcripts, and with those transcripts there was a list of the lines that were covered, both Cuban and Soviet. Maybe the committee should request the list before Ms. Goodpasture's deposition date. Ms. Goodpasture must be questioned extensively about the phones tapped in each embassy. She must also be questioned extensively about the list she says exists. When Ms. Goodpasture was asked what her responsibilities in the redacted tapes project were, she stated, "I recorded all of the correspondence, gathered the money, paying the people who did the work, making sure that the machinery was functioning, gathering up all the transcripts, and supervising most of the people involved with it." Redacted. Then it says there's an arrow drawn, and it says Arehart. Earhart. What is that? I don't know what that is. Earhart stated. Arehart stated that his routine contact was Ann Goodpasture. Find somebody named Earhart, please. Arehart. And stated that his contact was Ann Good. This looks to me like a failed redaction. Ann Goodpasture. His main contact was Ann Goodpasture, and that he just assumed that she was. And then the page cuts to something else. Something else is cut there, and this is obviously a page missing. Ms. Goodpasture stated that the tapes were maintained about 2 weeks and then would be erased and removed. That says page 63, line 24. Mr. Earhart, Arehart, stated that the tapes produced by the Cuban taps were maintained at the listening port or something ORT. He said that he had a special rack in these tapes in his workshop, which was on the floor above the room in which the listening port was situated. The rack had 30 slots in it. The tapes from each day's production went into a separate slot, with the oldest tapes going back into use in the monitor room. Thus, the tapes from the Cuban taps were held for 30 days before reuse. And then it says the Russian tapes Mr. Earhart stated were routinely given to Ms. Goodpasture so that she could get them to the Russian transcribers. He said that most all the tapes were returned to him. He said that he knew this because his supply of tapes from the Russian taps kept dwindling. He assumes, while claiming no actual knowledge, that tapes were routinely retained by either the Russian translator or someone in the station. He does not know which, because he claims to have no knowledge about what happened to the tapes after they left his possession and before they were returned to him. He said that the tapes were returned to him erased and ready to be reused. See the Earhart interview. Okay, we need to find this Earhart interview, Arehart. I can't believe that's a real spelling, but that's what it looks here. Or maybe it's Greyhart or Creehart. Something Rehart. It looks like an A or a C. It's got to be an A. It has no choice to be an A. But we need to fucking find this interview. Based on the information, the project and something personnel has been at the agency, something Ms. Goodpasture should be re-questioned extensively on Lee Harvey Oswald. alleged visits to the Cuban and Soviet embassies and the stations, others concerning Oswald, something to the assassination. Sorry, there's some jumbled writing here. It's hard to make out. Something, the areas that Anne G. must be questioned about are whether it would have been the standard procedure at the Mexico City station upon finding a transcript with the name Lee Harvey Oswald and the translator's comment, quote, same person who phoned a day or so ago and something in and spoke in broken Russian. Okay, same person who phoned a day or so ago and spoke in broken Russian. To check their records from the earlier date, September the 28th, to see if first the station had a photograph of this person or another tape recording of his voice, and two, whether redacted taps would have been I can't read that word. I'm assuming it's like retained or kept or held onto or something like that. 3, whether they were located, and 4, whether a something comparison was made, if a voice comparison was made. 5, if whether the results were cabled to Washington headquarters. Ms. Goodpasture must be questioned about the rule of the case officers. Shaw Phillips redacted in the redacted something extensively. Sorry, I can't read that. Mr. Earhart, when questioned about whether there was a process whereby transcription of important conversation in English or Russian could be expected, explained that there would not be such a process for a Russian conversation, since they could not judge the importance of the conversation due to the fact that no one in the base understood Russian. He said that there was such a procedure for English conversions. He said that conversations. He said that after listening to the conversation and deeming it important, he would make the tape he would mark it urgent and would get it in a box and deliver it. Thus, Ms. Goodpasture must be questioned thoroughly about the urgent procedure and who from the monitory base about the delivery process to the station, from the station to monitory base on urgent tapes. Then it says Ms. Goodpasture must be questioned the differentiation between, I can't read this word. It looks like RESAM, something, and then transcripts, and then something's redacted. Sorry. And then we have a list here. 1, redacted tapes. 2, Cuban photo. 3, Soviet photo. 4, relationship between Scott and, I'm assuming, relationship Scott and James Angleton. 5, Sylvia Duran. 6, Elena Garrow. 7, Scott's safe. 8, Oswald's contact visits. 9, career medal. She got a career medal. And then 10, 1977, her work in 1977. Soviet photos. Yeah, what the fuck was Anne Goodpasture doing for work after she left the CIA? I mean, you don't really leave the CIA, especially after 30 years, but we have Soviet photos, and it says Annie's role. There's a bunch of stuff faded, and the word glanced is in parentheses. See the Keenan interview. See redacted again, a bunch of page numbers. Did redacted get all the photos? Reread 03, that one's redacted also. Then read her statement and explanation, identification of the Russian photos. All right, so let me skip through some of this and see if any of this is relevant. So they want to, basically what they're doing is, this is the list of stuff that they were going to ask her before they got into do the questioning, but then CIA fucking shtick, Mr. Goldsmith didn't ask any of this shit, right? He didn't fucking press her on any of this stuff. All seems to agree, including Annie, that it was Shaw's responsibility. So I have another document here. We're going to go over this document because it's very relevant to what we're talking about. And this has to do with personnel at the Mexico City station, and this memorandum is from the HSCA dated 8/5/77 to JH and KK from PMO. Let me see, who would JH have been in 77, 78? Ooh, I don't know. I'll have to look that up. Attached, find a list of individuals known to have been connected with the CIA station in Mexico City during Lee Harvey Oswald's visits. This information has been gleaned mainly from the executive session testimony of David Phillips, ex-CIA agent who'd been in charge of Cuban affairs for the CIA in Mexico City. Other information comes from staff interviews with a witness, Boris Tarasov, formerly with the Intercept unit of the CIA station. It has been suggested that E. Howard Hunt may have been involved in CIA activities in Mexico City, and specifically with the visit of Lee Harvey Oswald. Many critics cite the fact that the CIA station chief has never been able to publicly as a basis for speculation that Hunt possibly held that position. This, however, would conflict with information from Phillips that the station chief was named Winston Scott, now deceased. This does not preclude the possibility that Hunt held another position at the station, but Tarasov was shown photographs of E. Howard Hunt, which he could not identify, nor did he recognize the name from CIA Mexico City. I will also be forwarding the organizational chart of the CIA station as best I can make out with the information known presently. Mexico City, CIA, a review of notes taken from the interviews with David Phillips indicates that there are several areas which our witnesses may be questioned about. Organization and personnel in Mexico City station. David Phillips. In 1963, Phillips was in charge of Cuban affairs for the CIA in Mexico City. As such, he was responsible for the monitoring of the Cuban embassy. He was in Mexico City from September 61 to early 65, succeeding Tom Hazlett. He originally comes from Fort Worth and joined the CIA in 1950. He recalls the Oswald tape as an intercept between the Soviet and Cuban embassies. Redacted head of Russian affairs at Mexico City station would have been primarily responsible for information derived from this intercept. Phillips was never in the intercept unit, which redacted. His immediate supervisor was redacted, but he answered to Win Scott. All right, we need to pull everything on David Atlee Phillips in regards to his testimony. He gave some testimony. Let's find it. Win Scott, station chief for the Mexico City station, CIA in 63, supervisor for Phillips in practice, although the deputy chief of station would normally have been the person who Phillips was to report. Scott was known for his almost photographic memory and a strong personality. He did not like to delegate authority. Scott was the person who made final determination as to whether information coming in over an intercept was to be forwarded to Washington or not. Scott is now deceased. He died of a heart attack around 1972. His name was not previously known publicly. Deputy Station Chief under Scott in Mexico City, Phillips, was not sure whether it was redacted or Alan White, who held this office at the time of Oswald's visit, but he felt fairly positive it was redacted. Phillips reported to Scott even though redacted was next man up in the hierarchy. Phillips believed that he is retired and lives in the Washington area. Alan White succeeded redacted as deputy station chief. Why is the deputy station chief under under Win Scott redacted? It's a short one too. It is a short one too. No more than 5 letters, possibly 6. No, 5 letters tops. Has to be 5, maybe 6, but don't think so. Possibly 5. Why would this be fucking redacted? Alan White succeeded redacted as deputy station chief. Phillips worked under him for a time. Phillips believed he is retired and resides in the Washington area. Joe Piccolo, CIA officer under Phillips. Robert Shaw, CIA officer under Phillips. Eventually, Shaw and Phillips had the whole assignment in Mexico City. The 2 operatives working inside the Cuban embassy reported to Shaw. One worked for the administrative area, one worked for the diplomatic area. Phillips believed Shaw is living in the Washington area and is still with the CIA. Phillips named him as the senior man in charge of the interception of telephone conversations of the Cuban embassy's offices. He would have been responsible for a dozen or so involved of the intercept unit outside CIA headquarters. Redacted came to the CIA from the FBI and had been with the CIA for 3 or 4 years at the time of the Oswald visit. This redaction here is longer. It's got to be 8 letters long. Phillips believes redacted, 8 letters long, is still in Mexico today. And Goodpasture. Phillips mentions her as the person responsible for transporting the tapes from the intercept unit to the CIA offices and back again. It is unclear whether she brought back tapes or transcripts of the conversations from the Russian embassy. It appears that she brought back transcripts in Spanish, i.e. translations were done at the intercept unit when the language was Spanish. The tapes that were in Russian were brought back to the CIA headquarters in all likelihood. From Phillips' testimony, it appears that the Russian translator for the CIA was based in the embassy where CIA headquarters were. Goodpasture transported the tapes and transcripts in suitcases. She was notified if tape was interesting or not. Phillips believes that Goodpasture is retired and residing in Redacted. And then you have something else that's redacted here, and it says also assigned to Phillips, replacing redacted, much longer, about probably 9 letters. Phillips believed redacted, presently working in the Washington headquarters of the CIA. And then you have a bunch of more names redacted here. Redacted is a name fully redacted. And although Phillips was somewhat shaky about the facts with respect to redacted, he was able to tell us that redacted was the Russian translator for the CIA, and that his office was most likely in CIA headquarters rather than the Soviet intercept unit outside. Phillips claims that the blank redacted was not in Mexico City at the time of Oswald's visit. CIA officer in charge of the assignment for Russian affairs, and as such Phillips' counterpart at the CIA station. Redacted worked with his wife, Redacted, on this assignment. Redacted and his wife later worked with Phillips when they were all assigned to Redacted. Phillips maintained that it would have been Redacted responsibility to decide where information contained in the Oswald intercept was to go and whether the intercept should be kept for any reason. He must be talking about Win Scott in that one here. Win Scott, though, would have ultimate responsibility. Phillips did not know of the Redacted's whereabouts today. Clark Anderson, local FBI agent in Mexico City, who would routinely receive pertinent information from the CIA. His title was legal attaché at the American Embassy. He was identified in the church report only as legat. Since he was the highest-ranking FBI official in Mexico, the FBI investigation there was under his direction. Anderson worked with Phillips in the Dominican Republic in 1965. He's presently retired and residing in San Antonio, Texas. Desmond Fitzgerald, chief of CIA operations in Washington CIA headquarters, who originally recommended Phillips to the Mexico City job. Fitzgerald is mentioned in the church report as one of the CIA agents involved with plots against Castro's life. The church report names him as the senior CIA officer charged with responsibility for Cuban affairs. He had a meeting with Amlash on October 29, 1963, for a policy discussion, informing Amlash that the U.S. was prepared to move to provide support for a Cuban uprising only after a real coup had been effected. Fitzgerald is now deceased. Redacted, wife of Redacted, worked with him at Soviet Affairs desk, assisting him in the work. She would prepare the reports to headquarters, etc., and he would sign them. She had previously resigned from another staff employee position at the CIA, but was hired again on a part-time basis for her knowledge of Russian and her experience in Soviet matters. And we have another Redacted, worked under Redacted, concerned with other matters related to Soviet affairs, such as Eastern European affairs. Personnel from other sources, namely through information garnered by our own investigation, were also aware of others involved with CIA Mexico City Station in 1963. Mr. and Mrs. Boris Tarasov. As one of the CIA's husband and wife teams, the Tarasovs had the job of translating and transcribing conversations in the Russian language going in and out of the Soviet embassy by telephone. They were experts in voice identification using such aids as newspaper clippings and other miscellaneous information about different individuals to help determine geographic origins, etc., about persons whose conversations were being tapped. The Tarasovs were directly involved in the translation and transcription of the Oswald conversation, although the specifics have become dim in Mr. Tarasov's memory. Tarasov succeeded redacted. Tarasov was never questioned by any investigative agency about the Oswald conversations. Boris Tarasov thought the conversation was most likely between Kastanov and Oswald and did not involve Kostakov or Yatsukov. Those are people who worked at the Soviet embassy. Tarasov knew one by the name of Kostin. Tarasov presently resides in redacted. Identified by Tarasov as CIA contact between the station and the translators. It is not clear whether Tarasov was in the station or in a separate intercepting unit, but it appears that he was probably outside the station. Redacted seemed especially interested in when the second call between Oswald and the Soviet embassy was intercepted and Oswald identified. Robert Zambernardi, identified by Tarasov as the photographic expert at the Mexico City station, at least from September 63 to November 63. Robert Zambernardi. Just remember that name, Robert Zambernardi. He was the photographic expert down in Mexico City. All right, and so then here, it appears as though we have a map of the organizational chart of the Mexico City, and it shows Win Scott at the top and his kind of counterpart, his FBI counterpart, Clark Anderson, which is probably an alias. He's labeled as Legat in most of the documents, and under him was Deputy Station Chief redacted. Why is the Deputy Station Chief redacted? Why is this so fucking important that it's redacted still? Who was the Deputy Station Chief under Win Scott? Why do I feel like I should fucking know this? Why do I feel like this should be on the tip of my fucking tongue? Could it be E. Howard Hunt? Could Hunt have been the short redaction? Could E. Howard Hunt have been the fucking deputy station chief? Let's get to the bottom of this, guys. We need to get to the bottom of who the fucking deputy station chief in Mexico City was and why they're going to such lengths to redact it. All right. And then under that, it shows Ann Goodpasture as contact and the Tarasovs and Zambernardi and all the other miscellaneous technical people. But this is some interesting stuff. We know that Oswald never went to Mexico City, and it was Kerry Thornley, right? But what we're seeing here is an overt attempt to cover up the activities of Kerry Thornley when he was in Mexico City by the Mexico City station. That's what we're fucking seeing here. If you haven't been able to determine that yet, that is definitely what's happening. So the question then becomes, was Win Scott and Ann Goodpasture and the deputy station chief who is redacted, did they all know about Kerry Thornley's operation that was going on at the time? I would think they would have to. I would think they would have to. Perhaps we'll get to the bottom of it one day. We are going to continue with Ann Goodpasture. I have 2 more interviews of her. Let me see if I can't break it up with something tomorrow on something else related to Mexico City. And then perhaps we'll come back to Ann Goodpasture after that. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you haven't tuned into my Bloody History World War II, I'm getting new subscribers almost every day now. It's been pretty fucking amazing. I think I have 33 or 34 paying subscribers now on Bloody History. So it's pretty good for 2.5 weeks, right? So please, it would really help me out if you subscribed over there. I'm putting a lot of work over there, and we're going to completely get to the bottom of World War II and debunk the Holocaust and all that stuff over there. So if you haven't bought the book yet, please buy the book. And what else is there? That's it. I'll see you guys tomorrow.